this is Ben Woodford with the Modern Education Radio Hour on 90.1 KZSU Stanford. This is the show where we dig into everything from current research trends to far-out ideas concerning any topic even remotely related to education. I'm Ben Woodford here in the studio, and I'll be with you every Friday from 3 until 4 p.m. for your commute home. Here at Modern Education, we bring cutting-edge ideas, philosophical discussions, insights from experts, and just about anything else you want to know. The goal is to help listeners interact with and understand learning in all its forms. If you have questions or suggestions for future shows, you can tweet at BenWoodford1 on Twitter, and I'll do my best to include your ideas in future shows. If you're a teacher, parent, student, or anyone interested in our collective future, I hope you'll tune in each week as we examine new ideas and interview guests from a variety of backgrounds. In the studio today, I will be interviewing Sue Kumleben, who is here with me now. She is a parent coach. She works in the field of parent coaching. For 13 years, 13 years ago, Sue joined the Parent Practice, a London-based consultancy dedicated to providing parents with research-based skills to help families be happier, calmer, and more successful. Her clients include schools throughout London and the U.S. Several of her previous students now offer parent coaching in Sweden, Spain, New Zealand, and the U.S. Sue serves as a governor of Glendower Preparatory School for Girls and is active in a variety of other charities. Sue, thanks for joining me today.
It's a real pleasure, Ben. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you making the time. It's such a joy to see your face in the studio today. So, Sue, I want to get started and just have you tell our listeners a little bit about what you do. What is this parent coaching thing all about?
Well, it's a lot different than what I started with, which was being a Wall Street lawyer. But as often happens when you have children, your whole life changes. And I found out that children were by far the hardest clients I'd ever had.
Absolutely. I can sympathize with that as a teacher.
And in one sense, I was rather lucky because one of my kids was more challenging than is standard. And as a result, I had very little choice but to really figure out what was going to be most supportive for him to help him to be happier and fit in better. And so I shifted over, became a parent coach. Now, what is it all about? There is now finally an enormous body of research about how to be a more effective people manager. In fact, I often say that thanks to management consulting, where billions of dollars have been spent, parents finally have the tools and tips that they need. It's a bit strange that it happened in that order. I would argue that parents predated management consultants, but who am I to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't matter where good information comes from as long as we can apply it.
Just exactly.
Yeah.
And so we're now learning how to manage people. Obviously, being a parent who coaches your own kids has the added complication of the fact that you love them. And oddly, that makes it harder. So we've had to add in additional aspects. I shouldn't just say we. The parent practice that I used to work for is standard across parenting in Western countries, as far as we know.
Yeah.
And so we offer skills to the parents so that they can keep their children motivated, give them a healthy self-esteem rather than an inflated, or in fact the opposite, a broken self-esteem, so that they will cooperate but also have a mind of their own, etc. And I'm very happy to go into the actual skills.
Absolutely. I think we'll get there. Yeah. But this tour of what you do is really great to start out. I don't think a lot of our listeners understand exactly what you would mean when you say parent coaching.
It's a fair point. And one of the things we've struggled with is because this didn't exist 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So nobody's grandparents ever thought about it this way, because society has changed so much in 50 years too. This is new, and it feels a bit like a threat. We've had a lot of clients who will say, well, wait a second. My parents didn't get any parent coaching, and look at me. I turned out okay.
Right. Which seems like a fair argument. So what do you say to that?
Well, the best argument back would be something along the following lines. If you were sitting down at supper, and the person next to you said, you know what? I have such a good instinct about flying. And you know, I used to fly a lot as a kid. I'll take you up on a plane tomorrow.
No, thank you.
Good answer.
Yes.
That's effectively what we've been asking parents to do forever.
Right.
Historically, small communities meant that the approach to parenting was handed down intra-generationally rather than skipping them. Nowadays, that's broken down so much so that each person is almost parenting in solitary confinement.
Yeah, it's the isolation factor that's happened
Yep.
for a lot of different people in a lot of different ways.
In a lot of different ways,
Yeah.
just exactly.
Yeah. Okay, wow. So let me see if I completely understand what you're saying here. You're saying you take these parents just out on a broad scale. The people, do they self-select if they want to work with you, or how do you
It's a really good question, Ben, because historically, parent coaching was only, quote unquote, for bad kids, bad parents.
Interesting.
And that's partly because you can muddle through. Again, I wouldn't probably get on that guy's airplane, but
Right.
you muddle through as a parent. And all parents are doing the best they can, without a doubt. They're
Yeah,
doing the best
yeah.
they can. When you get a bit of a curveball, which we did, you have very little choice but to go get some extra support.
Right.
What we've, however, seen is that if you ghettoize, pardon the expression, but parenting for only to be for bad kids or for bad parents, then not only does no one else access it, but those parents don't want to access it.
And there's a certain level of stigma, I would think, that comes along with that if it's only for quote-unquote problem children or difficult cases.
Just exactly. And whatever else one thinks about David Cameron, there were many great things he was doing, but David Cameron had announced that of the 4 legacies he wanted for his second prime ministership in Britain, one of them was to make parenting classes aspirational for everybody,
Oh, wow.
which would have been phenomenal. But unfortunately, he committed political suicide, so there's no legacy along those lines. But he had that idea that recognized that parenting is not, as I said, about bad kids, bad parents.
Right.
It's really for everybody. And I'll keep talking away. We've got an hour,
Please
Ben.
do, yeah.
The main reason I went into it is I knew so many fabulous, and particularly women, some fathers as well, but particularly women, who were devastated when they became mothers.
Yeah.
They had had lots of training in other areas. In fact, that can be one of the challenges. The skill set to be a Wall Street lawyer was not necessarily the skill set to be an effective parent, to put it mildly.
And if you feel like a competent person, you feel like you should be competent at everything you do.
Yeah, and this perfectionism creeps in, and so I'm going to be a perfect mother, I'm going to be a perfect Wall Street banker, I'm going to, teacher, whatever else it might be.
Right.
I've had teachers who can handle 23 kids no problem, but then they go home and they feel like they're not dealing with their kids.
That was me. I mean, I don't have kids, but I feel like in a classroom I could handle everything. And then you get me in a room with one single child, and I'm like, oh, what do I do with this thing, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Just goes to show things don't automatically transfer unless we work at making those skills transfer to other areas.
Yep.
Absolutely, yeah. So I wanted to actually go back to this analogy that you gave us about the airplane and somebody, you wouldn't just jump in an airplane with someone who said they flew a little when they were a kid, right? And I'm drawing that parallel with teaching because everybody's been in teaching, and yet most of us have been in that through the lens of a student. And we think, oh, well, I was a student for 12 years, so I can be a teacher. And it doesn't seem to always relate that way. And I'm taking this analogy just a little further. The plane flight, we automatically say, oh, that's a bad idea because someone could die or it could have serious repercussions. And yet, when you're parenting, it doesn't feel as real, and yet you really can make lasting damage to a life that lasts a lifetime.
I think one of the human brain's biggest weaknesses is its time horizon. And maybe goldfish have a longer time horizon than we do. I'm not quite sure, but point being, we won't get on that plane because it could crash tomorrow.
Right.
The kid won't crash tomorrow, and you won't even realize that the downward spiral has begun. But once you get on a downward spiral, once you get into the bad habits,
Right.
it's very, very hard to extricate them. And I would say, thankfully, we can't measure most of those habits, the emotional intelligence-related habits.
Right.
But as I said, once you start to go downhill, it's really hard to change it, and then they have huge ripple effects. So the boy who is not feeling happy and successful at home stops feeling good at school. Things start to go bad at school, so things get worse at home, and we know where that leads.
That's the snowball effect. As soon as one thing starts going bad, it just cascades into every other area of their life, which, again, I'm drawing a parallel to global warming. We see these problems 50 years out, and we think, oh, no big deal. There's nothing happening right now.
And it's exactly right, because right now we can see those problems.
Right.
Maybe even closer than 50 years, and now we feel like there's nothing we can do about them.
Yeah.
And same thing with parenting. Of course, there's an enormous amount we can do. I want to keep saying, though, that it's not that parents are bad.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not that they should know better. That's the whole fallacy that's kept us in this place for so long.
Right.
But there are lots of tools and skills that can be learned that not only improve your relationship with your child, but they improve your relationship with your colleagues, with your partner, with anybody.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's ancient wisdom that we all know it's never too late to start over. Even if you go all the way back to the Bible, there's the story of the prodigal son who came back and was forgiven and started over. And I think that's a great analogy for parents even right now. You can think about where you've been does not need to dictate where you're going.
The later you start, the harder it is to change.
Absolutely.
But I was using some of my skills with my dad. And I remember he lived on the East Coast, going home for a weekend, and a big decision to be made. Everybody said Dad will never agree. So I thought about it ahead of time, and first of all, I literally set up for success, which was the course I was just teaching over at Escondido this week. Set up for success, prepared the ground. When I got there, I didn't try to persuade him I was right, because by definition that would be telling him he's wrong.
Right.
So what I did first is I listened to him, validated him. Then we started to have a real conversation. And by the end of the weekend, he'd made the decision that everybody else thought was right. We thought it was right for him. And my sister said at the end of the weekend, she said, "My God, you're the dad whisperer." And there's no way I could have done that before I had these skills.
Right,
Some
right.
people suggest that means I'm manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
That word has a negative connotation. But in fact, what we are doing all the time is manipulating each other. The question is whether you're doing it for good or ill.
It's all about the motivation, right?
Yep.
If you're manipulating people into making better choices that make their life better, you're really just sort of crafting an avenue for them to improve their situation.
Yes, and I would say parents have always had good intentions for their children. I
Right.
want my child to be a success. I want them to get A's, so I'm going to nag them. I'm going to lecture them. I'm going to tell them what a rotten job they're doing. And somehow hope that would motivate them.
It's amazing that it doesn't. It seems like it would work so well. That's my sarcasm in case that doesn't come through on the radio.
It came through here.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, and this is sort of trying to head more towards the specifics, and I generally like to keep it on the positive note, but I'd like to start by just what are some of the big no-nos in parenting that you would immediately be wanting to address?
Some of them are language.
Okay.
So don't. In that when you say don't to a child, first of all, the human brain doesn't process the negative. So you have to process the positive before you get to the negative. For young children, that means that they have heard the direction, don't jump on the couch, and
All they hear is jump on the couch.
is the first thing in their brain.
Right.
Second, there are two periods in a child's life in general, really three, around the age of 3, around the age of 8, and around the age of 13, where children seem to be possibly pre-programmed to do the opposite of what you say.
Interesting. So being aware of that is probably a real advantage.
It doesn't mean say jump on the couch, mind you.
Right.
But the third reason is you don't want to say don't, because it doesn't tell a child what to do.
Ah, yes.
And it just would leave them standing there frozen in time.
You're not giving them a concrete way to move forward. You're simply telling them what to avoid, which is not very helpful.
Yep. To finish the thought, the fourth reason is it's already too late.
What do you mean by that?
Okay?
Yeah.
If a child is jumping on the couch and you say don't jump on the couch, does it work?
I don't have kids, but I would imagine probably not.
Well, not only that, but what were they just doing?
Jumping on the couch?
So clearly it doesn't work.
Okay.
And that's mainly because it's too late.
Right.
What you needed to do is set up for success, walk into the room a bit earlier and comment on some appropriate behavior they were doing, which brings them both to a connection with you, but also thinking what's the appropriate way to behave here.
Excellent.
So the answer on the don't jump on the couch, if they already are and you walk in the room, is first of all, you empathize with where they're coming from. What do they need or want?
Yeah.
And so you connect with them by saying something like, boy, you've got a lot of energy.
Yeah, recognizing a positive trait that's involved with what they're doing.
Yep, and these kids aren't trying to be horrible. They just have a lot of energy. So you say, you've got a lot of energy. You connect first, then you redirect.
Okay.
And say, jumping is for outside, couches are for sitting.
Okay, so you validate that they have something positive to offer, and then you give them an alternative. Makes sense. Seems pretty common sense if we would think about it that way.
And then more broadly, as you were just saying, what are the things you don't do as a parent?
Yeah.
Many parents think that discipline is equivalent to punishment, that I have to get angry if my child is doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, anger doesn't work very well from parents, and it has to do with the unconditional love.
Right.
Children very quickly realize that their parents still love them. And actually, if their parents got cross enough, then they're going to make it up to them. But no matter what, tomorrow Mom and Dad will still love me. So kids start to learn to do the duck's back approach.
Okay. Can you explain that, the duck's back?
Well, meaning that why bother listening to Mom and Dad? They don't really mean this anyway. They're just threatening to take away swimming on the weekend, but we're still going swimming on the weekend, and they're just losing it a bit. It's really their problem. I might give in if they give me that chocolate croissant.
If I was to try to generalize this a little bit, are you saying managing your own emotions will make it easier for you to be able to have an interaction that's meaningful with your children?
In a nutshell.
Oh, okay.
No, it's perfect. The first part of parenting is getting yourself under control.
Right.
What we say is the only person you're in charge of is yourself.
Makes sense.
But the other thing is you're also modeling for your kids. We always think that the goal is what matters. Again, one of the human weaknesses.
Right.
Getting them bathed.
Yeah.
Getting them into bed. When actually what children are picking up is the process you're using.
Yeah.
And so if you're shouting at them, if you're losing your temper, if you're rushing them,
Right.
what they're learning is those are the techniques to use with other people.
Exactly. They're paying more attention to how you get things done than they are to the exact words you're using.
It's
in every
the
situation.
process.
Absolutely.
And so they actually are absorbing that, and it becomes their process. So parents really do need to think about the process they're using more than the end goal.
Reminds me of the do as I say, not as I do approach to parenting.
My dad used to use that.
Right. Everybody says, we know the right thing to do. This is it. Let me tell you why. But then they do the complete opposite, and they're showing that I don't really live by the same things that I'm trying to tell you, which is a poor example.
Yeah, I remember that drove me crazy with my father. So discipline is not about punishment at all.
Right.
Discipline comes from the word disciple.
I hadn't thought of it before, but it makes perfect sense.
To teach.
Right.
And one of the biggest ways parents will teach, and this is a real burden actually, is by modeling.
Yeah.
Now, there's much more else, many other techniques you can actually add in.
Right.
But you really have to think about that. And it's like, darn.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's like, yay, because it gives us a chance to move forward with a better approach.
It does, because no matter where you are living, there is a primary caregiver for a child, the most dominant influence in their life.
Right.
And so you can countervail, again, not putting pressure on shoulders that are already bowed,
Right.
but you can make an enormous difference.
Absolutely. And I think every parent would sit down and say that they want to make the best opportunities for their children. A lot of times they just don't know how.
Yep.
And I'm sure we've been touching on some of this already, but what is like the first skill that you would try to get a parent to take on, or the first project you would try to work on in general, if you had sort of a stereotypical average parent that comes to you?
I'd always start, it's a perfect question. I'd always start with helping the parent to create a nicer atmosphere at home, because that creates the space for all the other skills. So another human weakness is that we notice what's wrong.
Yeah, we're great at that.
We are really good at it. And not just between parents and children, mind you.
Right.
Okay. Going back millennia, all animals notice what's wrong because it could be a life threat.
Right. It's preservation.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, taking the brain studies class together, we know that certain parts of the brain light up when this happens.
Right.
Well, humans, of all the animals in the world, not only notice what's wrong, but then they fix it.
Right.
Which is why we are sitting in a radio studio with these fabulous headphones on,
Yeah.
etc. So we're brilliant at fixing things.
Right.
It turns out when you try to fix another person, it backfires. So
Yeah.
notice I use the word fix, which is a great intention. I want to teach you, I want to help you, I want to fix you. If I start to fix you, what does that sound like to you?
Sounds like there's something wrong with me to begin with. Right.
And so you think I'm a bit displeased with you, I'm looking down on you. And parents, it turns out, probably, it's really depressing, 7 out of 10 things that a child hears are negative.
Wow. That's frightening.
Despair is the word I would use.
Yeah.
The worst part about it is the parents don't intend it at all.
Yeah, they have all the best intentions normally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But particularly modern parents who are laser beaming on their kids and they're forever what I call tweaking them. Sit up straight. Oh, watch out for this. Say hello. You know, if you say to your child, say hello to Granny,
Yeah.
you are telegraphing that you don't think they're going to.
Right, right. It's assuming they're going to make the mistake before you even gave them a chance to try.
Just exactly.
Yeah.
And without ever thinking about why they might not want to say hi to Granny right this second.
Right.
So what we need to do for interpersonal relationships is try to break a deeply, probably brain innate structure.
Yeah.
And instead of notice what's wrong, start to notice what's right.
How does someone go about breaking this very mechanistic, deeply seated instinct to be able to actually start forming a new habit like this?
Well, it's such a good question. One thing I did is I put little Post-its everywhere that said DP.
Okay.
So I would because descriptive praise, as it's called, descriptive commentary. Instead of
Right.
noticing what's wrong, I put notes around that said DP, descriptive praise, so that I would remember to say, oh, try not to look for what I can already see. Look for what is going well. And there is always something going well in the moment. And if you really can't find it, you can mention something from the day before.
Okay, so looking for something positive is a great way to break that initial instinct.
Well, literally something like Post-its, because the idea. So I've just explained the idea of stopping to notice, and then we train people how to actually notice effectively, because
Okay.
it's not praise. In fact, Professor Carol Dweck here at Stanford has really explicated this, that so much of modern praise backfires because
we praise the exact moment something happened instead of the process that got you there.
the result and the ability instead of the process.
Right.
Just exactly.
Right.
And when we do that, well, again, it backfires. So putting aside the specifics of how to descriptively praise, you need a concrete reminder, something like Post-its around. You need to literally practice. And so for our students, what I would have them do is start a book where they just write down at least 3 sentences a day that say, I notice you. And then you say what a child's doing, why it's a good idea, and possibly what quality it shows in the child. So right now, no one can see this because we're on radio, but it's such a joy to be talking to Ben because he smiles at me and he's nodding his head, and it makes me feel like I'm doing a good job. So
You're doing a great job. I love having you here.
I'm not nearly as nervous as I would otherwise be.
That's great. Yeah.
That was descriptive praise. And I noticed when I said it, you started to smile more. That's exactly what happens with your kids. When you say what they are doing and you give a reason for it, why it has a benefit, you make me less nervous. That is being thoughtful. That is being supportive. I've given you a quality. I've given you a reason why, and you're going to want to do more of it.
Right.
For children, most importantly, and maybe even for my buddy Ben,
Probably.
when you walk out of here, there will be one more, I call it layer of varnish, saying Ben is a supportive guy.
Right.
And our real goal with children is to get them to want to be and feel they are kind, cooperative, empathetic, supportive, brave, all those enormous number of qualities, values you want to give your children.
Right.
And I've just sort of told you how. So again, Post-its, practice, things like a praise book.
Yeah.
For a while, I had posted up on my wall a quote from Max Planck, the Nobel-winning physicist, that says, when you change the way you look at something, the thing you look at changes.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It turns out there is a physical property where that happens, but in humans, I watched my son, once I started, actually, shall I tell you the story?
Absolutely. We love stories.
Yeah, stories are always the best way to learn.
Yeah.
So our son was 7. We'd had to take him out of school. That was pretty tough because Paul and I were teacher pets type.
Yeah.
And I heard about this approach, so I started to use it. And the people who I was working with, who just predate the parent practice, they said, go look for Mark being cooperative.
Okay.
Now, they made a suggestion of going for the hardest thing for him rather than the easiest. We've now subsequently learned it's much better to start with the easy things. But
Baby steps.
Yes, please.
Right.
So I went home. It took me 3 days.
Wow.
Okay, but Saturday afternoon rolled around. Mark and his younger brother Nick were outside playing. And I opened the back door and I said, Mark, Nick, come on inside. It's time for your snack.
Okay.
And of course they came running in.
Who doesn't want a snack?
Exactly. But I got it, and I said, oh, Mark, you came as soon as I called. That's being cooperative. And it was really interesting. I realized I'd gotten it. What had he just done? He'd come as soon as I called.
Right.
What quality did that show?
What was the quality you were looking for?
Cooperation.
Right.
Yeah. So then I started to look around a bit, and all of a sudden my confirmation bias started to change about Mark a little bit too. I saw him as the least cooperative human being on the face of the planet. I think I could have extended it into a few other solar systems. And all of a sudden I'm finding times when in fact he is cooperating.
Right.
So my view of him, as Max Planck said, started to change. But much more importantly, Mark's view of Mark started to change. And about 2.5 months into this, which felt like an eternity, mind you.
Yeah.
As someone once said, every day being a parent feels like a year. Every year feels like a day.
Yeah.
But 2.5 months into this, Mark walked in the kitchen. He sat down. He said, you know what, Mom? I'm a cooperative boy.
Wow.
Well, do you know what, Ben?
I don't.
He wasn't. Not very much.
Right.
But he was more than he'd been, and he thought he could be, which was the beginning of him becoming...
Wow.
He's much more than just cooperative. He's independent. He's a philosopher. He's just absolutely fabulous.
So he had begun to change his self-image because of this reinforcement he was provided.
Yep. And none of what we said was a lie. You cannot lie with this. I can't just pretend and say, oh, Mark, when you hit your brother, that was being cooperative.
Right.
Descriptive commentary must be accurate, which
Right.
again goes back to what Professor Dweck says, that if you're going to do your growth mindset, it's got to be true. You can't just say, oh, you're trying really hard.
Right.
If the child isn't.
They know that it's false praise, and then they don't expect to put any stock in what you say at that point.
Yep. And the worst part, there's been research showing for children in particular with parents that if you do give false praise,
Yeah.
and boy, do parents, that's the best drawing I've ever seen, etc.
Right.
Children obviously will discount that praise relatively quickly, but then they discount all your praise.
As any rational person would. If we're told
Yeah.
lies, we learn to not listen to that person
Yeah.
anymore.
That's a real problem, hey?
Right. Yeah. I don't imagine any parent wants to discount their credibility with their own children.
Yep. For a variety of reasons.
Right. So, Sue, we're going to take a minute, and here on Modern Education, we always play some songs that have been requested. So we got one of your playlists coming up here, and we'll be back in a few minutes to keep going with this on the Modern Education Radio Hour here on 90.1 KZSU.
This portion of the radio show was deleted due to copyright reasons, but you can tune in to KZSU 90.1 every Friday from 3 to 4.
So, coming back with our guest. We got Sue Kumleben here in the studio. So we just finished speaking with Sue about her parenting, her coaching business for parents, speaking a little bit about the no-nos of parenting and some of the good skills that we would like parents to catch up with. Now, I wanted to come back and speak about this a little bit more from a different perspective. This parenting theme, this parent coaching thing sounds like kind of a very exclusive club where only certain parents maybe get a chance or can afford things like this. Is this something that everybody could afford, or how does someone go about being part of this?
What I would really love is if a country would, as in fact Britain was thinking of doing when I said that David Cameron had prioritized this, make this available to everybody.
Okay.
What an investment a country could make, and think about the long-term feedback from that long-term payoff, if you will, of helping to raise better, happier, more successful, more motivated, more cooperative human beings.
Oh, there'd be a wealth of data, I'm sure, and tons of lessons learned. So let's just pretend for a moment that this show is your chance to help all the families that you'll never get the pleasure of working with. What would be the top 3 skills or attitudes that you would suggest parents start working on right now?
Okay, first, which we've already talked about, is definitely stop noticing what's wrong.
Yeah.
And change your the ratio from 7 out of 10 negative to positive, and change that instead 4 to 5 positive, 1 negative. 4 out of 5.
Okay, that's clear.
Not praise, mind you, but actual commentary of what a child is doing that makes sense, why, and what quality it shows. So that would be by far the first thing.
Okay.
The second would be to understand that a child is never doing something for what you'd call truly a bad reason. They always have a need or want, and they're using an ineffective behavior to achieve it.
Okay.
You can call this empathy. It stretches further into emotional intelligence so that you stay calmer, they stay calmer. But if you can recognize that, then you start to connect with your child.
Yeah.
And as soon as you connect with your child, you have a much better chance of redirecting them.
Yeah, and probably for anybody you want to connect with.
For sure. Every single persuasion book says, if you want somebody to agree with you, listen to them first.
Yeah.
It sounds counterintuitive, but so much actually of human relationships are counterintuitive.
Right.
I always say the third leg of the parenting stool has to do with discipline. So the first is to motivate them by noticing what they're doing right. Second is to be empathetic. And the third is to have effective rules. Broadly speaking, what parents need to be is a boundary, not a bulldozer.
Okay.
I find more modern parents being bulldozers, requiring their children to do everything right all the time.
Yeah.
And most of the time the parent doesn't get upset, but that's where this tweaking comes in. Sit up straight, eat with your mouth closed, just constantly correcting their children. But when it actually gets into rules and consequences, in fact, it was my philosopher's son, the one who was a bit challenging when he was younger, who taught us that the biggest problem for modern kids is that the consequences have been separated from their actions.
Yeah.
So,
do you have an example of that?
The very simple one is a child spills their milk.
Right.
The parent shouts and then gives them more milk.
Yeah.
Or the child is in the playground and starts to push around another child. They
Yeah.
get shouted at and then they don't leave the playground.
So if we took those 2 examples, what would be the ideal reaction, say, if there is a freshly poured glass of milk that just spilled all over the kitchen table and down onto the floor?
I'm going to add, set up for success there as a parent, only pour as much milk as you're willing to have spilled.
Okay.
Then when that does spill, what you want to think about is not this moment, but the next time. But in this moment, what you'd say to the child is, oh, your milk spilled. How are you going to clean it up? With a sponge or with a cloth? In England, they use a cloth. I'm probably using a Brit term there.
That's okay.
So rather than get upset as a parent and then clean it up yourself, the child takes responsibility.
Right.
They do not get more milk unless they clean it up. And one of the hardest things for modern parents is that there are very few real consequences to children's actions anymore, because I always use the 10,000 year rule.
Okay.
What would have happened if a child 10,000 years ago spilled his milk?
Well, they wouldn't have been drinking milk in the first place, probably. But
Then you're probably right. But if you'll run with me on this,
yeah,
so
well,
Cave
they
Boy
would
is
have
sitting.
probably had to clean it up. Yeah.
They wouldn't have had more milk.
Right.
It'd be gone.
Yeah.
In fact, 10,000 years ago, there wasn't a single child who didn't race to get to the food and eat it, even though it was disgusting.
Right. Right.
So we know that the problems that modern children are having around food have very little to do with them. It has to do with what we're doing with them.
It's like trying to put modern restrictions on a brain that evolved over 100,000 years.
And there's a fair bit of research suggesting that our brain certainly hasn't caught up with the last 30 years of computer-based life,
Right.
much less even probably a lot of civilization is not part of our evolutionary structure.
Right.
So 10,000 years ago, the milk was spilled. There would be no more. And boy, children learn quickly. They did not leave that slingshot that they made outside because it would be gone.
Right.
So modern parents, by protecting their children, have gotten rid of almost all the natural consequences so children don't learn.
Yeah.
Now, that's good. We lose and harm many fewer children that way.
Mm-hmm.
But the pendulum has swung so far that I think they're actually missing out desperately on the other side. And what we've
Right.
replaced, sorry, this is a very long answer to the 3 points, but what we've replaced the natural consequences with is shouting, threatening, and punishment.
It's kind of creating an inappropriate consequence that doesn't serve the purpose of having to lose your opportunity to drink milk. Like,
Just exactly.
right. Right.
And so the best consequence isn't in the moment anyway.
Mm-hmm.
The best consequence is what can you do next time to make it less likely to spill your milk? And so the child might make a coaster that is up above their plate, because often children spill their milk because they put it down right near the edge of the table and continue on with their meal and it hits the deck. And so they make a coaster. You ask them why it might have spilled. They say, well, it's next to the edge of the table. You say, boy, you're paying attention. What do you think we can do? And they end up making a coaster. It's fun. They want to put it there. Then as you sit down at the table the next night, instead of saying, oh, be careful not to spill your milk, which is that negative approach,
Right.
you say, oh, yesterday you made that coaster. Where are you going to put your glass? They say, I'm going to put it on my coaster. You say, that's right. When they do it the next time without you mentioning it, you say, oh, you remember to put your cup on the coaster. And very quickly, they start to form a habit of where the cup goes, and it makes it so much less likely
Yeah.
to spill.
That makes perfect sense. And, as you're explaining this, I'm wondering, how long did it take you to build up this reaction so that it became natural to respond in a favorable way?
I remember 3 months in crouching down next to Mark.
Mm-hmm.
And
Who's Mark?
Oh, sorry. So Mark is our eldest son.
Okay.
And saying a descriptive commentary that I truly meant, that was in my voice.
Yeah.
So 3 months. Now, that's not a long time, or is. It really depends what you look like. The trouble with changing your habits of speech, which is a lot of parenting, is that if you're doing it in your primary language, you speak before you think.
Right.
Ask my kids, they can vouch for that.
Mm-hmm.
And to change that, therefore, is harder.
Yeah.
As I said before, straight practice. Literally, when no one's home, read through the descriptive phrases that you've written down, and you would be better at it within a week. But unlike French, where you really want to know how to order some delicious escargot, people don't tend to practice something like this as much as they need to.
Yeah, I think oftentimes building up these new skills feels a little silly to people, and they don't understand the gravity of what they're doing. Yet if they were a professional athlete training for an event, they would understand that they're not going to be good and ready unless they put in the work every single day getting there.
It's spot on.
Yeah.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's move on a little bit here. I love hearing about your parenting coaching. Honestly, I could ask you about this all day. You have such a great wealth of ideas. But I wanted to jump to some other stuff that you mentioned in our pre-interview. So you said for your 50th birthday, you ran the London Marathon twice, then shifted to a triathlon that was represented in the Great Britain at the World Championships, which is a distance race, is that?
I think for the Worlds I did what's called a sprint, which
Okay.
takes about an hour and a half. It's
That's a
long sprint.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then You're also involved in the European Championships and a lot of other things related to health and exercise and things like that. So, and this summer you're going to compete in your first half Ironman?
Well, that one I did right before I came to Stanford.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for bringing all this up. But
Yeah.
On a slightly different educational point, when my partner Paul stepped down from his main job, we weren't quite sure what we wanted to do. We wanted to make a big change so that we could be more flexible as we moved into the next third of our life.
Yeah.
And we decided to come to Stanford. And there's the most extraordinary program here called DCI, which is founded on 3 pillars: wellness, hence the triathlon,
Yeah.
community, and purpose.
Okay. So, wellness. Let's start there, right? What roles do wellness play in your life, and where does someone go if they wanted to start? How does someone start?
Oh, it's I was lucky because I'd been an ice skater when I was little, so when I came back to it as my 50th birthday present to run a marathon,
Yeah.
it wasn't too hard. But I set a goal and I go for it.
Okay.
And so for people to set a goal, there's a really interesting book, I've got to be careful, but called Younger Next Year, which details how, from a totally sedentary place, a person could slowly get to the point where they feel stronger, fitter, better, whatever they process they take to do that.
Right.
Its main conclusion is that aerobic training keeps you alive.
Yeah.
Strength training makes it worth it. That's the book in a nutshell.
Okay.
And so my aerobic training through triathlon, I think it does all 3 of those pillars for me, because the community here at Stanford, there's a tri club that is just hysterically great fun.
Yeah.
Really hard work.
Yeah.
Over 90 members. So we've got the community there. The wellness is obvious from word go, but you don't need to be as intense as that. The other aspect of the community there is, of course, that they reach out beyond. So they're just about to have their triathlon, which is when Stanford hosts all the other schools in the area,
Okay.
in early March. But on Saturday, they also have what they call the Sapling-a-thon.
Oh, that sounds cute.
Exactly. There's a category for the under 5s.
Okay.
And instead of a triathlon involving swim, bike, run, it's fun bike run.
I can't imagine what that is, but it sounds great.
Well, they do it for all different ages. I think it's up through age 12.
Okay.
What a hoot.
So where could people go if they wanted to find out more about this or come attend?
They can look online, and if you put triathlon, I promise you there's only one.
Okay. And that's tree as in like a Stanford tree athlon?
Tree instead of try. Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
What else could you do? I think this would be hug a tree instead of fear the tree, but
right.
And
Which is very fitting with your interview today.
exactly. But a huge number of abilities. Obviously, there's the collegiate race in the morning on Sunday, but there's also an open race. You can do relay teams. It's up in Redwood City.
Okay.
I've not swum in that water yet. You do want to rent a wetsuit if you don't own one, if you're going to do that leg. But
let's hope it's warm for you, Sue. So if people wanted to go out and check that out, they maybe could catch you there.
I would certainly be there.
Okay, sounds great. We're going to take another quick break, and we're going to come right back. One more of Sue's playlist will be on, and then we'll be right back to keep speaking with Sue Kumleben.
This portion of the radio show was deleted due to copyright reasons, but you can tune in to KZSU 90.1 every Friday from 3 to 4.
We're back on the air here for our last few minutes of the Modern Education Radio Hour. I have Sue Kumleben here in the studio with me. So, Sue, we're going to jump into some new stuff for these last few minutes of the show. You told me that you and your husband have been together more than 25 years. Is that right?
26 and a bit.
Oh, my gosh. What an achievement there. And you also, you mentioned this earlier a little bit, but you've recently downsized your lives. More of a minimalist kind of approach. Is that right?
To put it mildly, we had a house in England. We sold that 2 years before we moved here. And then we just worked to get rid of everything except what had been in the family. So that we saved some furniture, put it into a container, left it in England, and we had 9 bags with all of our worldly possessions and landed on the shores here.
Wow.
It is
wow.
it's not easy. The process took a long time. I was going to say like shaving a beard, but not that I would know about that. But you trim it first, you trim it again, and
Right.
then you start thinking about actually taking the final step.
Right, right.
And so that is hard. I only made one mistake. I got rid of a really old sewing machine. I regret that, but needless to say, I could buy another one, but I haven't yet, which tells you something.
Right. Maybe you didn't need it in the first place.
Yep.
Yeah, I recently did something similar when I moved here, and my biggest regret was throwing away my passport. But
Oh, yeah.
these things happen. It was that, or have to go through everything. So,
Yep. But I am hoping from the students I've been meeting, I
Yeah.
think that there is a less consumerist approach and a less of a desire to accrete. I hope.
are you finding that you don't miss any of your stuff, or that it's not a big deal to let go of that stuff?
The process of letting go wasn't always easy. The process of not having it is heaven. No, it's wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
no, I recommend it highly. We didn't even do the holding the hand and see if it brings you joy business, but I hear that that's a really good way. One of the triathletes I've been running with said that she just did that,
Yeah.
and got rid of 2/3 of her clothes. It was, and she's
Yeah.
so happy about it.
Such a liberating experience, just letting go of the things we don't need.
Yep.
And that could be a great analogy for so many other parts of our lives, probably with your coaching. If we can let go of the things that aren't serving us well, we can move more towards the habits that will actually help us.
It's an interesting way to put it. If people could clarify what that is, they'd
Right.
do it in a heartbeat.
Right, absolutely. So, I know you've had such varied and vast experiences and done so many cool things. Is there something that really stands out that you're most proud of in all your time and energy that you've put out?
Oh, wow. It's got to be the parent coaching.
Yeah.
It just all comes back to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I love anything I do. When I was a Wall Street lawyer, I loved it. When I was a parent and it wasn't really, really difficult, I loved that well enough. But being a parent coach just suits me down to the ground. I did a Myers-Briggs the other day, and what does it say? But I should be a therapist teacher.
Yeah.
But
That's pretty much what you're doing, right?
it is just absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant. So
Yeah.
Stanford has helped me refine what I might do with that in the future.
Okay.
But yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, I'm going to ask you to be a little vulnerable here, and remembering the growth mindset and how important it is to learn from our mistakes. Is there a mistake that you've made along the way that you really wish you could have taken back, or something that you learned the hard way that maybe someone could learn from you instead?
The biggest mistakes I made were with my young children,
Yeah.
and I just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
It turns out that I have my primal brain, my chimp, as Professor Steve Peters in the chimp paradox would call it. My chimp is a fight chimp, not a flight chimp.
Interesting.
And while I've never had a fight with my husband, I have been upset at a few people who've given me parking tickets. But it's been my children.
Yeah.
And without a doubt, you'd have to use the word abuse that I, as a grown-up who was 3 times taller than them, put towards them was just inexcusable.
Right.
But luckily, I had the time, the energy, and my husband's support to figure out what else I could do.
Wow.
And to put it mildly, I'm spending the rest of my life correcting that and helping other people
Wow.
correct it.
Wow, that's so beautiful and so valid. So we are running out of time here, Sue. I want to thank you so much. And before I let you go, is there any last bit of encouragement you'd like to leave our listeners with? Something positive and uplifting for them?
If I can go back to the parenting thing.
Please.
My husband and I had the most fun with our teenagers. Teenagers are fabulous. They're brilliant. They're interesting.
Yeah.
They do not have to be the stereotypical ones.
Right.
However, they will be most likely unless people can break some of those bad habits. And so all I'd recommend for parents is go out there, try to find support, because it does exist now. And that way you can enjoy them when they're still home before there are wonderful people out there in the real world.
I agree. Those are the greatest years, and it's such a great way to leave off. So thank you so much again for joining us today in the station here. Thank you for all your wonderful words of insight and sharing your experiences. And I am your host, Ben Woodford, with the Modern Education Radio Hour here at KZSU Stanford.